For nearly everything we call history, we have names, dates, monuments, and written words to anchor the story. But that comfort collapses the moment we step further back. Modern humans have walked this planet for more than 300,000 years, yet almost everything we recognize as civilization fills only a thin sliver at the very end. The rest is silence, broken only by stone tools, scattered bones, and images painted deep underground by hands indistinguishable from ours. These were not half-formed minds waiting to become human. They loved, feared, planned, imagined, and understood the world with brains identical to your own. The true mystery is not how civilization arose, but what kind of lives were lived long before it ever existed, and why that vast stretch of human experience was almost erased from our memory. Before we dive deeper, ignite that like button and prepare for the revelations to come. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from, what time it is there. And as always with our videos, the visuals are here to add context, but they aren't necessary to follow along. Thank you for always having our back. Prepare yourself, and let's dive in. Picture a human being who could walk past you on the street without drawing a single glance. Same posture, same proportions, the same subtle balance between fragility and endurance written into the body. Dress them in modern clothes and there would be nothing to give them away. Now remove the street, remove the city, remove every structure you associate with human life, and place that person in Africa more than 300,000 years ago. No farms, no metal, no writing, no villages, no concept of history at all. That person is still fully human. And that fact alone breaks almost everything we think we know about where our story truly begins. Anatomically, modern humans emerged far earlier than most people realize. Fossils recovered from North Africa, particularly from a site in present-day Morocco, show skulls with high, rounded brain cases, flat faces, and the distinctive chin that separates our species from every other human line. When these remains were first examined, researchers expected familiar dates that would fit neatly into an already accepted timeline. Instead, laboratory results forced a reckoning. These humans lived more than 300,000 years ago, pushing the origin of Homo sapiens back by over 100,000 years and shattering the idea of a sudden birth of our species in a single place. What followed was even more unsettling. Similar fossils began appearing across the African continent in regions separated by vast distances. East Africa, Southern Africa, central zones that had once seemed peripheral to the story. All showed populations with broadly modern anatomy living at roughly the same time. This meant humanity did not arise as a single group that later spread outward. It emerged as a network of populations connected by migration, intermarriage, and shared adaptation. Our species was born not as a point, but as a web. The bodies were modern, but bodies alone do not tell the full story. Brains leave few traces in stone, and behavior is far harder to read than bone structure. Early Homo sapiens had brains the same size as ours, folded in the same way, capable of language, emotion, and abstract thought. Yet for tens of thousands of years after our physical form stabilized, the archaeological record looks strangely quiet. Stone tools appear, yes, but they are nearly indistinguishable from those made by other human species. There is hunting, gathering, and fire use, but little that clearly signals symbolic thinking. No obvious art, no clear signs of ritual, nothing that screams modern consciousness. This gap haunted anthropologists for decades. How could humans look like us, think like us, and yet leave behind so little evidence of what we consider humanity. One possibility is that behavior truly did change later, that modern minds emerged slowly after modern bodies. Another possibility is more uncomfortable. Perhaps those early humans were already thinking symbolically, already telling stories and imagining worlds beyond survival, but the materials they used did not survive. Wood rots, skin decays, paint fades. Entire cultures may have vanished without leaving a trace sturdy enough to last hundreds of thousands of years. Small cracks in that silence eventually appeared. Along the southern coast of Africa, at sites exposed to harsh waves and shifting sands, archaeologists uncovered something unexpected: pieces of ochre, a natural mineral rich in iron, ground deliberately into powder. Ochre ranges from yellow to deep red, and it serves no nutritional purpose. It does not sharpen tools, it does not preserve food. Its value lies in color. Color used to stain skin, objects, perhaps bodies, transforming the ordinary into something marked and meaningful. When humans choose to decorate themselves, they are declaring identity. They are saying that appearance matters, that symbols carry weight beyond function. Later still, shells appeared with carefully drilled holes, designed not for eating, but for wearing. These beads were not accidental. The perforations were precise, the shells often transported far from their original coastal environments. Wearing such an object meant carrying a message: who you were, where you belonged, and how you wished to be seen. This was abstract thought made visible, meaning detached from utility and invested into form. Then came burial. The dead were no longer simply left where they fell. Bodies were placed deliberately into the ground, positioned with care, sometimes accompanied by tools or pigment. Digging a grave with stone tools requires time, coordination, and collective agreement. It demands that a group pause survival activities to honor someone who will never contribute again. That decision alone reveals a profound shift. Death was no longer just an event. It was a transition that mattered. Burial suggests awareness of mortality and perhaps curiosity about what lies beyond it. It hints at grief, memory, and the idea that an individual's existence has significance even after it ends. These are not simple instincts, they are the roots of philosophy, religion, and art, growing quietly long before temples or myths were carved into stone. And humans were not alone in reaching these thresholds. Between 300,000 and 40,000 years ago, the Earth supported multiple human species at the same time. Neanderthals thrived across Europe and Western Asia, adapting to cold climates with robust bodies and ingenious tools. They hunted large animals, buried their dead, and likely used pigments. Denisovans ranged across vast areas of Asia, leaving genetic traces in modern populations from Tibet to the Pacific. Other groups, smaller and stranger, lived on islands and in isolated regions, each representing a different solution to being human. This was not a straight ladder of progress, but a tangled forest of human possibilities. Species met, competed, exchanged genes, and sometimes disappeared. The question that echoes through this period is deceptively simple. Why did only one survive? It was not raw intelligence. Some extinct humans had brains as large or larger than ours. It was not tool-making skill. Others matched or exceeded early Homo sapiens in craftsmanship. The answer may lie in social flexibility, in the ability to form larger networks that could share knowledge and resources across great distances, a group connected to others through trade, marriage, and shared stories is more resilient than one standing alone. When drought strikes one region, help may come from another. When an idea emerges, it can spread instead of dying with its inventor. Over time, these networks become invisible engines of survival, amplifying small advantages until they reshape destiny. By around 70,000 years ago, the evidence changes abruptly. Tools become more diverse and refined. Art flourishes. Music appears in the form of bone flutes. Long-distance trade becomes unmistakable. It is tempting to call this a sudden awakening, but the hardware was already there. What changed was expression. The human mind did not appear overnight. It found a way to leave clearer fingerprints on the world. What came before was not emptiness. It was a vast, living chapter of experimentation, adaptation, and meaning-making played out in materials that time rarely preserves. Those early humans were not waiting for civilization to begin. They were already human, already complete, navigating a world that demanded intelligence, cooperation, and imagination on a scale we are only beginning to understand. Long before cities or borders or even the idea of ownership existed, human life unfolded at a scale measured not in generations, but in seasons and migrations. To understand how our ancestors actually lived, strip away every modern assumption about work, time, and survival. 50,000 years ago, a human waking at dawn did not rise to an alarm or a schedule imposed by institutions. The rhythm of the body followed light, temperature, and hunger with an accuracy modern people rarely experience. Sleep came in waves through the night, broken and resumed, punctuated by quiet conversations and the maintenance of fire, a pattern perfectly suited to vigilance in a dangerous world. Food was not the desperate scramble popular imagination insists on. Archaeological evidence from skeletal remains shows that many hunter-gatherers were well nourished, often healthier than the first farming populations that would follow them. There was food stored from previous days, dried meat, nuts, roots, berries collected in season. Hunger existed, but chronic starvation was not the default. Survival depended not on endless labor, but on knowledge. The workday was short by modern standards. Ethnographic studies of recent hunter-gatherer societies used carefully as analogues show a consistent pattern. 3 to 5 hours of focused effort met most material needs. The rest of the day belonged to social life. Children played and learned by observation. Adults repaired tools, told stories, rested, made love, argued, laughed, and created. This balance is why anthropologists sometimes describe these societies as affluent, not because they possessed excess objects, but because their needs were satisfied with time left over. Gathering plants was not random foraging. It required a mental map of the landscape that functioned like a living library. A skilled gatherer could look at an unremarkable patch of ground and know that edible roots lay hidden beneath the soil, or that a toxic plant could become safe only after a specific sequence of soaking and cooking. Seasonal timing mattered. A mistake could mean illness or death. This was applied biology learned through generations of observation and correction, encoded not in books but in memory, story, and demonstration. Hunting demanded an equally complex intelligence. Tracking animals involved reading subtle signs left in soil and vegetation, reconstructing movements hours or even days after passage. Hunters understood animal behavior with a precision that modern biologists often struggle to match. They knew where herds would move when weather shifted, where prey would seek shelter, how fear and curiosity could be exploited. Strength mattered less than insight. The best hunters were strategists capable of predicting outcomes across time and terrain. Cooperation transformed risk into advantage. Large animals were taken down not by reckless charges but by coordinated group action. Hunters communicated plans, assigned roles, and adjusted tactics on the move. Some drives took hours, others days, guiding animals toward natural traps like cliffs or narrow passes. Success depended on trust. No individual could dominate the process. A single failure endangered everyone. Health in these societies followed patterns that challenge modern assumptions. Without dense settlements, infectious diseases struggled to gain a foothold. Epidemics require large, stationary populations to persist, conditions absent in mobile bands. Tooth decay was rare. Bone diseases linked to nutritional deficiencies were less common than in early agricultural remains. Average height was often greater than in later farming communities, and it would not recover globally until the modern era. Life was not safe. Injuries carried real risk. A broken leg could be fatal if it prevented movement. Childhood mortality was significant, as it is in all pre-modern societies. Yet those who reached adulthood often lived into their 60s or beyond. The myth of universal early death collapses under skeletal evidence. Aging existed, and elders mattered. Social organization made inequality difficult to sustain. Bands typically numbered between 20 and 50 individuals. Constant movement prevented the accumulation of material wealth. Leadership existed, but it was situational. The best hunter led during hunts. The most knowledgeable elder guided decisions about movement. The most skilled healer took charge during illness. Authority flowed from competence, not position. Attempts to dominate were checked by ridicule, resistance, or simple refusal to follow. Sharing was not moral idealism, it was practical logic. A large kill could not be consumed before spoiling, so meat was distributed. When fortune reversed, generosity would be returned. Knowledge followed the same rule. Tool-making techniques, medicinal insights, and survival strategies were taught freely. Hoarding information threatened group survival and offered no lasting advantage. Children grew up immersed in this communal system. Care came from many adults, a practice known as alloparenting. Learning was constant and experiential. Skills were acquired through imitation, practice, and gradual responsibility. By adolescence, a child had absorbed a staggering amount of information about plants, animals, weather, tools, and social dynamics. Education was rigorous, though it lacked classrooms and exams. Medical knowledge reached surprising levels of sophistication. Hunter-gatherers identified plants that reduced fever, eased pain, treated infections, and assisted childbirth. Willow bark, containing compounds later refined into aspirin, was used long before chemistry named it. Molds with antibiotic properties were applied to wounds. This was empirical science driven by survival, refined over centuries of observation and trial. The sustainability of this way of life explains its longevity. For more than 200,000 years, it worked. Humans shaped ecosystems through controlled burning and selective harvesting, encouraging the growth of useful plants and maintaining open landscapes that supported game. They adapted when conditions changed, shifting diets, relocating camps, altering strategies. Flexibility was the core strength. Limits existed. Population density remained low. Innovation spread slowly across vast distances. Large permanent structures were rare. These were not failures but trade-offs that preserved balance. For most of our existence, this was humanity's equilibrium state, the environment in which our psychology evolved. When agriculture finally emerged around 10,000 years ago, it did not immediately improve human well-being. Early farmers worked longer hours, ate less varied diets, and suffered higher disease burdens. What agriculture offered was numbers. It supported more people per unit of land, and over time, sheer population growth reshaped the world. Yet beneath modern systems, the hunter-gatherer blueprint remains. Our desire for variety, our discomfort with extreme inequality, our need for social connection, and our capacity to learn complex skills through observation all trace back to this deep past. Understanding it is not nostalgia, it is recognition. Before history was written, humans were already living full, intelligent, and deeply social lives. Shaped by a balance, modern societies are still struggling to recover. Deep underground, far from daylight and weather, early humans left behind something that should not exist according to outdated ideas of prehistory. Narrow cave passages open into chambers where stone walls erupt with motion and life. Horses stretch forward as if mid-gallop. Bulls lower their heads in silent charge. Lions prowl, rhinoceroses clash, deer leap with an elegance that feels almost cinematic. These images were not scratched casually near cave entrances. They were created deep inside the earth, in darkness broken only by the flicker of animal fat lamps, places that required effort, planning, and courage to reach. The age of these paintings forces a complete rethinking of human creativity. Some are more than 35,000 years old. That means they were already ancient when the first pyramids were built. The artists who made them lived closer in time to the earliest Homo sapiens than to us. Yet their work shows mastery of perspective, movement, and composition. Muscles curve realistically, bodies overlap to create depth. Natural bulges in cave walls are used as shoulders, hips, or flanks, turning raw geology into living anatomy. This was not accidental beauty, it was technique. Pigments were carefully prepared from minerals like iron oxides and charcoal. Colors were mixed, applied, blended. At some sites, scaffolding was built to reach high ceilings, indicating coordinated labors and long-term planning. Artists worked in confined, dangerous spaces where oxygen was limited and mistakes could be fatal. This was not decoration for comfort. It was intentional, meaningful action. The question that immediately follows is unavoidable. Why? Why invest so much effort in places where few people would ever see the results? One long-standing idea suggests hunting magic, the belief that painting an animal could grant power over it. The logic is appealing, but the evidence complicates it. Many of the most frequently depicted animals were not primary food sources. Predators dominate some caves, creatures rarely hunted but deeply feared and respected. If this was about securing meat, the subject choices make little sense. Another interpretation points to ritual. These caves may have functioned as sacred spaces, places set apart from daily life where individuals underwent initiations or ceremonies. The most elaborate paintings often appear in the deepest chambers, requiring crawling through tight passages and navigating total darkness. Imagine being led into such a space as a young person, your senses overwhelmed by shadow, echoing sound, and towering images that seem to move in firelight. The experience would have been transformative, imprinting identity and belonging in a way words never could. Storytelling offers another possibility. The arrangement of images sometimes follows patterns, clusters that may represent sequences or narratives now lost to time. These could have been visual memory systems, teaching tools encoding migration routes, seasonal cycles, or social rules. In societies without writing, memory was externalized through landscape, art, and ritual. A painted wall could function as a living archive, read by those trained to understand it. And yet none of these explanations fully captures the emotional weight of standing before such art. There is another answer, simpler and more unsettling. They created art because they needed to. Because something in the human mind demands expression. The same impulse that drives people today to paint, compose music, or write stories existed then, unbroken and urgent. The most direct evidence of this impulse appears in the handprints. Across continents from Europe to Southeast Asia to South America, human hands were pressed against stone and outlined in pigment. The result is a negative image, a ghostly signature. Some hands are small, likely belonging to women or adolescents. Some are missing fingers, possibly due to injury, ritual, or frostbite. In at least one site, the prints of an adult and a child appear side by side, frozen in a shared moment tens of thousands of years old. These marks are haunting because they collapse time. Place your hand over one and the alignment is exact. Palm to palm, finger to finger. The message is unmistakable. Someone stood here. Someone chose to leave proof of their existence. The same desire that drives modern people to carve names into trees or walls is present here, stripped of irony and distance. It is the simplest declaration imaginable. I was here. Art did not remain fixed to cave walls. Portable objects began to appear, carved from bone, ivory, and stone. Small figurines with exaggerated human features were shaped with care and carried across landscapes. Some emphasize fertility, others individuality. Whether they represented deities, ancestors, ideals, or specific people remains unknown, but their wear patterns show they were handled often, valued beyond their material worth. Tools themselves became canvases. Bone needles were decorated with geometric patterns. Spear points were shaped not only for efficiency but symmetry and balance. Pendants made from shells and animal teeth were strung and worn, turning the body into a moving display of identity and affiliation. This attention to aesthetics signals something crucial. Beauty mattered even when survival was never guaranteed. Music joined the visual arts. Bone flutes appear in the archaeological record around 40,000 years ago. These were not crude whistles, but carefully tuned instruments capable of producing multiple notes. The holes were spaced precisely, suggesting an understanding of sound and scale. Imagine the sound of a flute echoing through a cave or across an open plain, carrying emotion without words. Songs are gone, but the instruments testify that humans did more than speak. They sang. Dance likely accompanied music. Some cave images suggest figures in motion, limbs bent rhythmically. Archaeological sites sometimes reveal open areas with acoustics suited for sound and movement. Firelight, rhythm, paint, and story merged into experiences that bound groups together emotionally and socially. Art was not separate from life, it was woven into it. The deepest mystery is not the sophistication of what survived, but what did not. Paint applied to skin, patterns drawn on bark, sculptures carved from wood, songs passed orally, dances performed beneath stars. None of these leave durable traces. The explosion of art, visible around 40,000 years ago, may not represent a beginning, but a threshold where expression finally intersected with materials capable of enduring time. Earlier evidence supports this idea. Ochre crayons and abstract engravings date back more than 70,000 years. These are not pictures of animals or people, but deliberate patterns, lines, crosshatches, shapes repeated with intention, symbolic thought without representation, a mind exploring meaning before form. What emerges from all this is a portrait of humans who are not merely adapting to their environment, but interpreting it, transforming it, making it meaningful. Long before agriculture or writing, humans were already artists, musicians, and storytellers. They were not waiting to become modern. They already were. And in the silence of those caves, their voices still speak, reminding us that to be human has always meant more than survival. It has meant expression, memory, and the urgent need to leave something of ourselves behind. The world 20,000 years ago was locked in ice. Vast glaciers pressed southward across continents, grinding landscapes flat and trapping oceans inside frozen walls that rose higher than any modern skyscraper. Sea levels dropped hundreds of feet, exposing coastlines that no longer exist and revealing land bridges that connected continents like temporary corridors. Winds cut sharper, winters stretched longer, and ecosystems shifted constantly as cold tightened its grip. This was not a stable environment, and yet humans spread into it, not as victims clinging to survival, but as innovators who learned to bend extreme conditions to their advantage. Cold kills quickly, exposure drains heat from the body faster than hunger ever could. To survive Ice Age winters, humans needed more than fire and shelter. They needed technology. Clothing became an engineered system rather than a simple covering. Archaeological sites across Europe and Asia reveal bone needles so fine they rival modern sewing tools. These needles were not decorative novelties. They were instruments for producing fitted garments that trapped warmth and blocked wind. Hides were scraped, softened, and cut into shapes that matched the human body. Seams were stitched with sinew, creating clothing that functioned as insulation and armor against the cold. This required planning across time. An animal had to be killed at the right season, its hide processed through days of labor, its materials stored until needed. Clothing was layered. Inner garments held warmth close to the skin. Outer layers shed snow and moisture. The same principles used by modern mountaineers were discovered through trial, error, and accumulated knowledge tens of thousands of years ago. These were not primitive solutions. They were optimized systems. Shelter followed the same logic. In regions where trees were scarce, wood could not support permanent structures. Humans turned instead to what the landscape provided in abundance: bone. Mammoth bone houses rose from frozen ground, circular structures framed by skulls and long bones, covered with hides and insulated with earth. Some required the remains of dozens of animals, implying long-term occupation and coordinated effort. These were not emergency huts. They were durable dwellings built to withstand brutal winters and relentless wind. Inside, fire management became an art. With little wood available, bones were burned as fuel, producing intense heat, but demanding precise control to avoid suffocating smoke. Hearths were lined with stone to contain heat. Ventilation pathways allowed smoke to escape while preserving warmth. These solutions reflect deep understanding of airflow, combustion, and thermal dynamics, concepts modern science would not formalize for millennia. Hunting in this environment reached a scale that still strains belief. Ice Age megafauna towered over humans. Mammoths weighed several tons. Woolly rhinoceroses carried armor of muscle and horn capable of killing with a single strike. Yet humans hunted them repeatedly, efficiently enough to use their bones for construction. This was not reckless bravery, it was strategy. Large animals were hunted through coordination and planning. Migration routes were learned and remembered across generations. Natural features like cliffs, frozen rivers, and narrow valleys were turned into kill zones where size became a disadvantage. Groups worked together, driving animals toward traps with sound, movement, and fire. After the kill, systematic butchering followed. Meat was processed, fat rendered, bones shaped into tools, hides prepared for clothing. Nothing was wasted. Preservation techniques extended survival beyond immediate consumption. In frozen climates, meat could be stored for months, naturally refrigerated against decay. Stockpiles buffered groups against scarcity. This allowed humans to remain in regions that would otherwise have been uninhabitable. It also enabled population growth, small by modern standards but significant enough to sustain cultural continuity. The Ice Age was not a single frozen event. It was a series of violent climate oscillations. Temperatures rose and fell within the span of a few generations. Glaciers advanced, then retreated. Rainfall patterns shifted, transforming grasslands into deserts and back again. Human populations experienced repeated bottlenecks, periods when numbers dropped dangerously low. Genetic evidence reveals moments when our species teetered near extinction. What saved humanity was not dominance, but dispersion. Small groups spread across vast territories, loosely connected by kinship and trade. When one group failed, others survived. When resources vanished in one region, people moved. Flexibility, not permanence, was the core survival strategy. Mobility allowed humans to follow opportunity rather than defend fixed ground. Lower sea levels opened pathways that reshaped migration. Land bridges connected Asia to the Americas, Southeast Asia to Australia, and Britain to continental Europe. These were not narrow crossings but wide territories rich in plants and animals. Humans settled them, hunted them, and used them as corridors to expand further. Coastal environments became especially important. Exposed shorelines offered concentrated food sources like shellfish, seabirds, and marine mammals. Some groups specialized in coastal living, developing boats and fishing technologies that allowed movement along the edges of continents. The presence of humans in Australia more than 50,000 years ago confirms deliberate seafaring. Even at the lowest sea levels, stretches of open water remained. Crossing them required boats capable of carrying people, supplies, and knowledge. Navigation relied on reading stars, currents, winds, and the behavior of birds. These journeys were not accidents. They were planned explorations into the unknown, driven by curiosity, pressure, or opportunity. Climate shaped culture by creating refugees. In Europe, regions with milder conditions supported denser populations and became centers of innovation. Art flourished. Tool technologies diversified. Ideas spread along networks formed by shared survival challenges. In Africa, shifting rainfall created cycles of expansion and contraction that pushed populations together, then apart, driving exchange and adaptation. Asia's varied landscapes produced specialized strategies. High-altitude groups adapted to thin air. Forest dwellers learned to exploit dense vegetation. Steppe populations followed vast herds across open land. Everywhere, humans learned, remembered, and transmitted solutions. By the time the Ice Age loosened its grip around 12,000 years ago, humans occupied every continent except Antarctica. They had endured cold more severe than anything modern civilization has faced. They had crossed oceans, mastered fire in extreme conditions, and built societies capable of preserving knowledge through chaos. The Ice Age did not crush humanity. It forged it, sharpening adaptability, cooperation, and imagination. When warmer climates returned, humans were ready for the next transformation, carrying with them lessons learned at the edge of survival. A single human footprint pressed into wet sand along an ancient shoreline marked the beginning of a movement that would reshape the entire planet. 60,000 years ago, Africa lay behind that step, and ahead stretched a world still untouched by our species. The print itself vanished long ago, erased by tide and time, but its consequence did not. That quiet moment initiated the most successful expansion of any large mammal in Earth's history. This was not humanity's first attempt to leave Africa. Earlier human species had ventured beyond the continent and vanished when climates shifted or resources collapsed. What made this migration different was not intent to conquer, but readiness. The people who moved carried minds refined by hundreds of thousands of years of adaptation to unpredictable environments. They were not explorers in the modern sense. They were hunters following game, families seeking stability, communities responding to pressure. Yet the result was unprecedented. The most likely path traced the coastline. Shorelines offer reliable resources, shellfish gathered by hand, fish trapped in tidal pools, seabirds nesting in predictable cycles. Following the coast allowed movement without radical changes in subsistence. A beach in Arabia differs from one in South Asia, but the logic of survival remains familiar. Generation by generation, small movements accumulated into vast distances. Speed in evolutionary terms can be deceptive. 5 to 10 kilometers per generation seems insignificant. But over 1,000 generations, it carries people halfway around the world. Genetic evidence suggests that within just a few thousand years of leaving Africa, descendants of these early migrants reached Southeast Asia and Australia. That journey required crossing open water, even when sea levels were lower than today. Open water crossings do not happen by chance. Boats had to be built, not simply imagined. Whether constructed from lashed logs, hollowed trunks, or skin-covered frames, they had to carry people and supplies safely across stretches of ocean where land was out of sight. Navigation depended on pattern recognition, the rising and setting of stars, the direction of swells, the flight paths of birds at dawn and dusk. Knowledge was tested, refined, and passed on. Failures likely cost lives. Success reshaped continents. Australia was not an easy landfall. Its ecosystems were unlike anything African migrants had encountered. Massive marsupials roamed its interior. Deserts burned under relentless sun. Rainforests hid dangers and opportunities in equal measure. Humans adapted quickly, developing fire management techniques that reshaped vegetation and controlled animal movement. They created trade networks spanning thousands of kilometers and social systems so intricate they remain among the most complex ever documented. Elsewhere, migrations branched and rejoined. Some groups moved north into the Middle East, encountering Neanderthals who had thrived there for hundreds of thousands of years. These meetings were not purely hostile. Genetic evidence shows interbreeding. Modern populations outside Africa carry Neanderthal DNA, silent proof of relationships formed tens of thousands of years ago. In Eastern Asia, encounters with Denisovans left genetic legacies that persist today, including adaptations that help people survive at high altitudes. Human expansion was not a clean replacement. It was a process of contact, absorption, and sometimes disappearance. When modern humans reached Europe around 45,000 years ago, they entered landscapes long occupied by Neanderthals. Within a few thousand years, Neanderthals vanished as a distinct population. This was likely not due to systematic slaughter, but competitive exclusion. Modern humans formed larger social networks, shared innovations more rapidly, and extracted resources more efficiently. Small advantages compounded over time. The Arctic pushed adaptation to its limits. By 30,000 years ago, humans lived in Siberia, where winter temperatures plunged far below anything most modern people could survive, even briefly. Tailored clothing, semi-subterranean shelters, and fuel-efficient fires made life possible. These communities hunted mammoth and other megafauna, crafted tools from ivory and bone, and buried their dead with care. Survival did not erase culture, it intensified it. The Americas represented the final continental frontier. For decades, scholars believed humans arrived there around 13,000 years ago via a land bridge between Siberia and Alaska. New discoveries have pushed those dates earlier, suggesting migration began at least 15,000 years ago, possibly more. Some evidence points to coastal routes, where boats allowed movement along the Pacific edge before ice-free corridors opened inland. Once humans entered the Americas, their spread was astonishingly fast. Within a few thousand years, people reached the southern tip of South America. Along the way, they adapted to tundra, forests, plains, rainforests, mountains, and coasts. Each environment demanded new solutions. Knowledge accumulated quickly, shared across networks that stretched farther than archaeologists once thought possible. The final great maritime expansions came much later, but they echoed ancient patterns. Polynesian navigators crossed thousands of kilometers of open ocean to reach remote islands like Hawaii and New Zealand. They read waves, stars, and clouds with precision, born of generations of observation. These voyages were deliberate acts of exploration, driven by confidence in knowledge systems refined over millennia. They stand as a reminder that human movement across water began not with compasses or maps, but with memory and trust. Modern genetics has transformed our understanding of these migrations. DNA acts as a record of ancient journeys, revealing population splits, reunions, and lost lineages that archaeology alone cannot see. It shows that human history is not a straight line, but a braided stream. Groups separated, reconnected, exchanged genes and ideas, then separated again. Some left no physical traces beyond fragments carried in living bodies. What emerges from this deep past is not a story of inevitability, but of resilience. Humans did not spread because the world was easy. They spread because they could adapt faster than conditions could defeat them. Oceans, deserts, ice sheets, and mountains slowed them, but never stopped them. Fire burned on every continent, languages multiplied, stories followed people into every landscape. By the time the last great migrations ended, humans had become a global species. No other large mammal had achieved anything similar. The planet itself was changed not by domination at first, but by presence. Wherever humans went, they carried knowledge, memory, and the capacity to imagine a future beyond the horizon. That single footprint in the sand was not an accident. It was the expression of a species that had learned how to move, adapt, and endure. Long before temples rose from stone or prayers were written into books, humans were already confronting death with intention. In caves and shallow graves across Africa, the Middle East, and Europe, bodies were laid to rest with care more than 100,000 years ago. Hands were positioned deliberately, faces were oriented with meaning. In some cases, tools were placed beside the dead, objects that required hours of skilled labor to produce. These actions served no practical survival function. They were gestures directed at something unseen. One of the most striking details found again and again in these burials is color. Red ochre, a mineral rich in iron that produces a deep, blood-like pigment, appears sprinkled over bodies, rubbed into bones, and packed into graves in quantities that demanded significant effort to gather and prepare. Ochre does not preserve flesh. It does not ward off scavengers. Its power lies in symbolism. Red evokes blood, warmth, vitality, and movement. Covering the dead in red may have been an attempt to maintain a connection to life or to mark death as a transformation rather than an ending. In northern Iraq, archaeologists uncovered pollen preserved in ancient soil, evidence that flowers had been deliberately placed in a grave nearly 100,000 years ago. The flowers had no nutritional value and no structural purpose. They were chosen for beauty, scent, and meaning. This act reveals something profound. Someone wanted death to be softened, marked with care, made meaningful. That impulse places early humans firmly within the emotional and cognitive world we recognize today. Burial practices varied across regions and time, but they share a common thread. The dead were treated as if they were going somewhere. Food offerings were left. Weapons were positioned within reach. Jewelry was buried where no living eyes would ever see it again. These acts suggest belief in continuity, the idea that existence did not simply stop when the body failed. Even without written doctrine, humans were already constructing worldviews that extended beyond immediate reality. Underlying these practices was a way of seeing the world that modern societies often struggle to grasp. For early humans, the environment was not an inert backdrop. It was alive. Rocks, rivers, animals, weather, and landscapes were understood as beings with awareness and agency. Anthropologists call this worldview animism, but that term can mislead. This was not a childish confusion between objects and life. It was a sophisticated philosophy rooted in constant interaction with a living environment. When survival depends entirely on reading subtle signals from the world, awareness becomes distributed. The movement of birds signals weather shifts. The behavior of animals reveals seasonal change. Plants respond to soil, light, and moisture in predictable but complex ways. Humans embedded in this system experience themselves not as masters of nature, but as participants in a network of relationships. Every hunt, every gathering expedition, every migration was a negotiation. In such a world, animals were not merely prey. They were other people wearing different bodies. A successful hunt required respect, apology, and ritual acknowledgement. The animal was believed to have chosen to give itself, and failure to honor that gift could bring misfortune. Rivers could be angered, mountains could protect or punish, storms carried intention. This perspective fostered humility and attentiveness rather than domination. Within these belief systems, certain individuals became specialists in crossing boundaries. Evidence from cave art and ethnographic parallels points to the emergence of shamans, figures who mediated between human communities and the wider living world. Images carved and painted tens of thousands of years ago depict human figures blended with animal features, antlers, wings, claws. These were not monsters or fantasies. They represented transformation, the ability to step outside ordinary identity. Shamanic practice involved altered states of consciousness achieved through disciplined techniques. Rhythmic drumming could drive the mind into trance. Prolonged dancing exhausted the body until ordinary perception dissolved. Sensory deprivation in dark caves removed external reference points. Fasting weakened the boundary between waking and dream. These methods were not random, they were refined technologies of the mind, passed down through generations. Plant knowledge played a central role. Hunter-gatherers understood which plants healed, which nourished, and which altered perception. Psychoactive substances derived from fungi, seeds, and leaves were used carefully, often in ritual contexts. These were not recreational escapes. They were tools for accessing non-ordinary states where visions occurred, insights emerged, and meaning was negotiated. The experiences were interpreted within cultural frameworks that gave them coherence and purpose. From these altered states came stories, songs, and guidance. Shamans returned with knowledge believed to originate from spirits, ancestors, or animal beings. They identified new hunting grounds, diagnosed illness, resolved conflict, and maintained balance between the human group and the wider world. Their authority rested not on force but on trust in their ability to navigate unseen realms. Astronomy intertwined naturally with spirituality. The sky was not distant, it was an active presence. Humans tracked the movements of the sun, moon, and stars with remarkable precision long before written records. Stone alignments marked solstices. Cave paintings were positioned to catch light on specific days. The regularity of celestial cycles provided a framework for time, ritual, and meaning. The heavens were read as messages, patterns that reflected order beyond human control. This deep relationship between belief and observation challenges modern assumptions. Early spirituality was not opposed to empirical knowledge, it emerged from it. When patterns were observed consistently, they were imbued with meaning. When cause and effect were unclear, stories bridged the gap. These narratives were not lies, they were tools for understanding a world that could not yet be reduced to equations. Around 12,000 years ago, something extraordinary appeared on a hilltop in what is now southeastern Turkey. Massive stone pillars carved with animals and abstract symbols, arranged in circular enclosures. The site predates agriculture, writing, and permanent settlement. The people who built it were still hunter-gatherers, and yet they organized labor on a scale that required hundreds, possibly thousands, of participants over generations. The existence of such monumental architecture before farming overturns long-held assumptions. It suggests that belief, not surplus food, was the catalyst for large-scale cooperation. People gathered not because they were forced, but because the rituals performed there mattered more than immediate survival concerns. Religion, it seems, did not emerge after civilization. Civilization may have emerged around religion. What these early belief systems shared was not dogma but relationship. Humans understood themselves as part of a living, responsive universe. Death did not sever connection, it transformed it. Art, ritual, and story wove individual lives into something larger and enduring. In a world without certainty, meaning was created through participation, through acts that said Existence mattered even when survival was never guaranteed. That foundation would shape everything that came next. At first glance, it looks almost absurdly simple. A person crouches near a fire, striking one stone against another. Chips scatter onto the ground. There is no machinery, no blueprint, no visible complexity, and yet hidden inside that small, precise movement is one of the most demanding cognitive skills humans ever developed. Stone tool making was not brute force, it was prediction made physical. To shape stone deliberately, the maker had to see what did not yet exist. Every strike required anticipation of how energy would travel through the material, how fractures would propagate, how angles and force would interact. One mistake could ruin hours of work. The best tool makers read stone the way musicians read instruments, sensing hidden lines and internal tensions. They knew which rocks would flake cleanly and which would shatter unpredictably. This knowledge was not intuitive. It was learned through long apprenticeship, passed hand to hand, generation after generation. By the Ice Age, some humans could produce blades thinner than a fingernail, sharp enough to slice meat, hide, and tendon with ease. These were not random shapes. They were standardized forms repeated with remarkable consistency across vast regions. Standardization means shared mental templates, agreed upon ideals of form and function. It means communication, it means teaching, it means culture. Heat treatment added another layer of sophistication. Certain stones, when heated carefully and cooled slowly, became easier to shape and sharper at the edge. This required controlling fire with precision, maintaining temperatures below the point of cracking while altering internal structure. The stone had to be prepared before shaping, not after. That meant planning across time, understanding cause and effect without formal theory. Humans were conducting material science long before the concept existed. Tools were not disposable. Damaged points were resharpened. Broken blades were repurposed. Handles were repaired. This reveals an economy of effort and resources grounded in foresight. Carrying raw stone was costly. Knowing how to extend the life of a tool mattered. It also meant recognizing when a tool had reached the end of its usefulness and letting it go. Judgment mattered as much as skill. As technology diversified, tools became specialized: scrapers for hides, awls for piercing, burins for engraving, bone and antler. Composite tools emerged, combining stone, wood, sinew, and adhesive. Adhesives alone revealed deep chemical knowledge. Plant resins were mixed with charcoal or ash to improve strength and flexibility. The ratios mattered. Too brittle and the tool failed, too soft and it slipped. This was experimentation refined by memory. None of this existed in isolation. Tool making was embedded in social life. Skills were demonstrated publicly. Mistakes were corrected. Innovations spread through observation and imitation. A successful technique did not belong to an individual. It became part of the group's shared repertoire. This openness accelerated cumulative knowledge, allowing small improvements to stack across generations. Technology extended beyond tools. Fire itself was transformed from a natural force into a managed system. Humans learned how to start fires reliably, transport embers, control intensity, and extinguish flames safely. Fire altered diet by making food more digestible and safer, freeing energy for brain development. It extended waking hours, creating space for social bonding and storytelling. It offered protection and comfort. Fire was not just heat, it was infrastructure. Containers followed. Stone-lined pits, woven baskets, leather bags, and wooden vessels allowed storage and transport. Most of these materials vanish with time, but their absence does not indicate non-existence. The logic of survival demands containers. Carrying water, food, tools, and infants requires them. Where direct evidence disappears, indirect signs remain in wear patterns, residues, and spatial organization of sites. Clothing, too, was technology. Needles imply thread. Thread implies cordage. Cordage implies twisting fibers from plants or sinew into rope. Rope enables traps, nets, bindings, and transport. Nets revolutionized hunting and fishing by allowing passive capture. A well-placed net could work while humans rested. This multiplied effort and reduced risk. It also required trust. Nets are useless without cooperation. The mental demands of maintaining such systems were immense. Knowledge had to be stored, recalled, and transmitted accurately. Forgetting how to make adhesive or misjudging a fire could be fatal. This pressure shaped cognition toward precision, memory, and teaching ability. Language evolved not just to express emotion or social bonds, but to convey procedural knowledge. How to do something mattered as much as what to do. Navigation reveals another dimension. Humans learned to orient themselves across vast landscapes without maps. They memorized landmarks, star positions, prevailing winds, animal migration routes. The land itself became a memory system. Hills, rivers, and rock formations were encoded with stories that preserved direction and timing. This method of storing information externally reduced cognitive load while increasing reliability. Boats expanded this capacity into water. Even simple watercraft required understanding buoyancy, balance, and materials. A poorly designed vessel sank. A well-designed one carried families across rivers, lakes, and seas. Seafaring magnified risk but also reward, opening access to islands, coastal resources, and new territories. The confidence to step into a craft and leave sight of land reflects trust in accumulated knowledge, not recklessness. All of this technology rested on social stability. Teaching takes time. Apprenticeship requires patience. Innovation demands tolerance for failure. Groups that punished experimentation stagnated. Groups that allowed trial and error advanced. Over thousands of years, this favored cultures that balanced caution with creativity, preserving core knowledge while allowing refinement. Importantly, technological complexity did not produce rigid hierarchy. Tools empowered individuals but depended on collective systems. No single person controlled fire, stone, or food. Interdependence remained high. This prevented monopolization of power through technology, a pattern that would change only much later. What modern eyes often misinterpret as simplicity was in fact efficiency tuned to environment. Stone tools did not evolve into metal because metal was unavailable. Where resources allowed, humans used them. Where they did not, stone remained optimal. Technology was adaptive, not progressive in a linear sense. Seen clearly, early human technology was not a stepping stone towards civilization. It was a complete system capable of sustaining populations across every environment on Earth. It reflected minds capable of abstraction, foresight, and collective learning. Far from primitive, these technologies reveal a species already operating at the edge of what cognition allows, building a world not from excess, but from understanding. Night fell differently before artificial light reshaped the human sense of time. When the sun disappeared, darkness arrived fully, broken only by fire and stars. The sky revealed itself in a way few modern people ever experience. crowded with points of light so bright they cast faint shadows. For early humans, the heavens were not distant, they were intimate, constant, and deeply instructive. Patterns emerged quickly to anyone who watched, night after night. Certain stars rose and set together. Others traced arcs that shifted predictably across seasons. The moon waxed and waned in a cycle that governed tides, animal behavior, and human fertility. These rhythms were not abstract curiosities. They structured movement, hunting, gathering, and ritual. Time was not counted by numbers, but by sky. Humans learned to track these cycles with precision long before writing. A group that knew when herds would move or when plants would flower held a survival advantage. Celestial observation offered that knowledge. The position of the sun at dawn marked seasonal change. Its extreme rising point signaled solstices, moments when days stopped shortening or lengthening. These turning points mattered. They announced shifts in weather, resource availability, and risk. Across the world, humans encoded this knowledge into landscape. Stones were placed to frame sunrises on specific days. Pathways were aligned with lunar standstills. Caves were painted where light would strike walls only at certain times of year. These were not random alignments. They required observation over generations. A single lifetime was not enough to confirm patterns. Knowledge had to be preserved, transmitted, and refined. Memory alone was insufficient. Humans externalized information through story and symbol. Myths tied star patterns to animals, ancestors, and events. A constellation was not just a group of stars. It was a narrative device that carried timing and direction. When a certain figure appeared in the sky, it was time to move camp or begin a hunt. The story made the data unforgettable. This fusion of observation and meaning blurred the line between science and spirituality. The sky was both a calendar and a realm of power. Movements of planets were not merely tracked, they were interpreted. Regularity implied order beyond human control. Irregular events, eclipses, comets, sudden bright stars, were charged with significance. They disrupted expectation and demanded explanation. Importantly, this worldview did not oppose empirical accuracy. On the contrary, ritual depended on precision. A ceremony held too early or too late lost its power. Alignments had to be maintained, errors were noticed, corrections were made. Over centuries, this produced astonishing accuracy. Some ancient alignments match astronomical events within degrees that rival later civilizations. Navigation depended on the same skills. On land, stars provided orientation when landmarks failed. On water, they were essential. A rising star could indicate direction. The angle of constellations above the horizon revealed latitude. Ocean swells reflected distant land. Clouds formed differently above islands. Birds flew out to sea in the morning and returned at dusk. These signals combined into a mental map invisible to outsiders. This knowledge was guarded carefully, passed only to those prepared to carry it. Navigation errors meant death. Apprentices learned through long practice, repetition, and correction. Confidence was built slowly. When a group committed to a voyage across open water, they trusted not luck, but accumulated observation validated by generations. The sky also shaped concepts of order and morality. If celestial bodies moved according to rules, perhaps human behavior should as well. Cycles suggested renewal rather than finality. Death could be followed by return, just as the moon disappeared and reappeared. This reinforced burial practices and beliefs in continuity. Time was not a straight line, it was a circle. Seasonal gatherings reflected this logic. Groups that dispersed for most of the year converged at predictable times tied to celestial markers. These gatherings reinforced social bonds, exchanged knowledge, and arranged partnerships. They were moments of abundance and renewal, synchronized with cosmic rhythms that gave them legitimacy. Art absorbed celestial influence. Spirals, dots, and repeating patterns appear in rock engravings across continents. These motifs may represent stars, cycles, or movement through time. Even when meanings are lost, repetition suggests importance. These were not decorative flourishes, they encoded perception. Sound joined sight. Drumming rhythms often mirror heartbeats or walking pace, grounding participants in bodily time. Songs followed patterns that echoed repetition and variation, reinforcing memory. Music synchronized groups emotionally, aligning individual experience with collective rhythm. Around firelight under stars, sound and sky merged into a single experience of belonging. The psychological impact of this environment cannot be overstated. Living under an unpolluted night sky fosters awareness of scale. Humans recognize themselves as small within something vast, yet connected to it. This combination of humility and belonging shaped social behavior. Cooperation mattered. Isolation was dangerous. Modern societies often treat astronomy as abstract knowledge removed from daily life. For early humans, it was embedded. The sky guided movement, structured ritual, and anchored meaning. It linked past, present, and future through cycles that repeated reliably across generations. A child learned the same stars their grandparents had known, creating continuity that outlasted individual lives. When agriculture and cities emerged, this celestial framework did not disappear. It was built upon. Temples aligned with solstices, calendars formalized lunar cycles. Priests and astronomers inherited roles once held by elders and shamans. The language changed, but the foundation remained. Long before civilization, humans had already learned to read the universe. They mapped time without clocks, navigated without compasses, and found meaning without scripture. The sky was their archive, their teacher, and their mirror. In learning to watch it carefully, they learned how to endure, how to coordinate, and how to imagine a world ordered beyond immediate survival. That knowledge, etched into stone and story, carried humanity forward through darkness, guiding footsteps long before roads or borders existed. For hundreds of thousands of years, the human world remained small by design. Groups stayed compact, rarely exceeding a few dozen individuals. This was not because larger societies were unimaginable, but because intimacy was functional. Everyone knew everyone else. Reputations mattered. Cooperation was enforced not by laws or institutions, but by memory, emotion, and mutual dependence. Survival depended less on command and more on cohesion. Conflict existed, but it was managed differently than in later hierarchical societies. In a band where everyone depended on shared effort, open aggression threatened collective survival. Those who consistently disrupted harmony faced ridicule, isolation, or expulsion, punishments far more dangerous than physical violence in a world where solitude could be fatal. Social pressure maintained balance more effectively than force ever could. Kinship extended beyond blood. Relationships were woven through shared experience, mutual obligation, and repeated interaction. Marriage often linked distant groups, creating networks that stretched across landscapes. These alliances reduced risk. In times of scarcity, a group could move toward relatives or trade partners. This web of relationships acted as insurance against environmental unpredictability. Exchange played a central role. Long before money or markets, humans traded materials, knowledge, and people. Obsidian from volcanic regions appears hundreds of kilometers from its source. Shells from distant coasts turn up far inland. These objects moved hand to hand, not through centralized systems, but through chains of personal connection. Each exchange reinforced social bonds and shared identity. Trade was not only economic, it was informational. News of animal movements, climate shifts, and innovations traveled with goods. A new tool design or hunting technique could spread across regions without anyone ever meeting its original inventor. This diffusion accelerated cultural evolution, allowing successful ideas to outcompete less effective ones. Language underpinned all of this. Spoken words carried instructions, stories, and norms. But language did more than transmit information. It created shared reality. Stories about ancestors, animals, and spirits encoded moral lessons and survival strategies. Humor diffused tension. Songs strengthened memory. Speech allowed humans to coordinate in ways no other species could match. Importantly, language was not static. It evolved with social needs. New environments demanded new vocabulary. Relationships required nuance. Over time, syntax and metaphor expanded expressive capacity. Humans could describe not only what was, but what might be. They could plan futures, recall pasts, and imagine alternatives. This temporal flexibility reshaped decision-making. Leadership emerged, but it was fragile. Authority was earned, not inherited. A respected hunter, healer, or storyteller held influence only as long as competence remained visible. Failure eroded status quickly. There were no permanent offices to shield leaders from accountability. Power circulated, preventing accumulation. Gender roles existed, but were not rigid in the way later societies would enforce. While tasks often followed patterns based on physical demands and childcare, flexibility was common. Women hunted in some contexts. Men gathered and cared for children. Skill mattered more than category. Survival rewarded adaptability. Childhood unfolded differently as well. Children were not segregated into artificial stages. They participated in daily life early, learning through observation and play. Responsibility increased gradually. Mistakes were expected and tolerated as part of learning. This produced adults with deep, practical competence and confidence rooted in experience. Play itself served serious functions. Games rehearsed hunting skills, social negotiation, and physical coordination. Storytelling allowed children to explore danger and morality in safe contexts. Laughter strengthened bonds. Joy was not a luxury. It was part of resilience. As populations slowly increased, tensions emerged. More people meant more pressure on resources. Some regions saw intensified competition. Groups fissioned, splitting into smaller units to reduce strain. Others developed more complex seasonal aggregation patterns, dispersing and reuniting in rhythm with resource cycles. These strategies delayed the need for permanent settlement for tens of thousands of years. But change was inevitable. Climate shifts at the end of the last ice age transformed ecosystems. Warmer temperatures stabilized environments. Certain plants became more predictable. Humans began experimenting with tending rather than merely gathering. At first, these practices complemented hunting and foraging. They did not replace them. As plant management intensified, populations grew. Denser groups created new challenges. Disease spread more easily. Waste accumulated. conflicts escalated, old methods of social regulation strained under numbers they were never designed to handle. Informal pressure weakened, memory could not track everyone, reputation blurred. To manage these pressures, humans invented new structures. Rituals became more formal. Leadership roles hardened, property concepts emerged, boundaries formed. These developments were not improvements in a simple sense. They were responses to new problems created by population density. Agriculture eventually locked humans into fixed locations. Fields demanded defense. Storage enabled inequality. Surplus allowed specialization. For the first time, some people controlled resources others depended on. Hierarchies solidified. Coercion replaced consensus. Work intensified. Yet these changes did not erase the older social blueprint. Hunter-gatherer instincts persisted. Humans still craved fairness, autonomy, and connection. Extreme inequality felt wrong at a visceral level. Hierarchy required constant reinforcement through ideology, ritual, and force because it ran against evolved expectations. Understanding this transition reveals a paradox. Many aspects of modern life that feel oppressive are not failures of civilization. They are mismatches between ancient social wiring and recent structural inventions. Humans evolved for small groups, shared effort, and flexible leadership. Civilization demanded scale, permanence, and control. The deep past shows that other ways of living were not only possible, but stable for extraordinary lengths of time. For most of human existence, cooperation was not enforced by law, it was lived. Social order emerged from mutual dependence and shared understanding rather than institutions. This does not mean the past was idyllic. It was hard, uncertain, and often dangerous. But it functioned. It produced art, knowledge, resilience, and meaning without centralized power. Recognizing this challenges assumptions about progress. It invites reflection on what kind of social structures truly align with human nature. Long before cities and states, humans built societies grounded in relationship rather than rule. Those societies carried our species across continents and ice ages. Their legacy still shapes how we think, feel, and resist systems that ignore the deep architecture of the human mind. For most of human existence, the landscape itself functioned as memory. Hills, rivers, rock formations, and animal paths were not passive features, but anchors for knowledge. When people moved through territory, they were not wandering randomly. They were navigating a living map, layered with stories, warnings, and instructions accumulated across generations. A bend in a river marked a seasonal crossing. A particular tree signaled the presence of edible roots nearby. A stone outcrop recalled a successful hunt or a fatal mistake. Space stored information the way books would much later. This method of remembering demanded constant movement through familiar ground. Knowledge stayed alive only if it was revisited. A path forgotten became dangerous. A water source ignored could dry up unnoticed. Mobility kept memory accurate. It also meant that learning was inseparable from place. You did not just hear about knowledge, you walked it, touched it, smelled it, and tested it with your body. As environments changed, so did these memory systems. Climate shifts altered rivers, vegetation, and animal ranges. Humans adapted by updating their internal maps. Old stories were revised, new landmarks were added. This flexibility allowed survival in landscapes that transformed within a few generations. It also fostered humility. Knowledge was never final. It was provisional, always open to correction by experience. This relationship to land shaped identity. People define themselves not by abstract categories, but by territory and movement. Who you were was tied to where you could travel safely, what resources you understood, and which neighboring groups you were connected to. Identity was geographic and relational, not bureaucratic. Territory did not imply ownership in the modern sense. Boundaries were fluid, negotiated through kinship and seasonal use rather than fixed lines. Different groups used the same spaces at different times, coordinating through custom rather than enforcement. Conflict occurred, but it was often mitigated by shared understanding of limits and obligations. A place was not something to possess, it was something to participate in. As populations grew and climate stabilized, pressure mounted on this system. Some areas could no longer support repeated seasonal use without degradation. Humans began to experiment with modifying landscapes more intensively. Controlled burning encouraged growth of desirable plants. Selective harvesting favored certain species. In some regions, people planted seeds intentionally near campsites, not yet farming, but guiding nature's response. These practices altered ecosystems gradually. Certain plants thrived near human habitation. Animals adapted to human presence. Over time, the boundary between wild and managed blurred. Humans did not step suddenly into agriculture. They drifted toward it through small decisions made for convenience and reliability. Reliability changed everything. When a food source could be predicted and defended, movement slowed. Camps lasted longer, structures became more substantial, storage pits appeared. With storage came surplus. With surplus came new problems. Who controlled stored food? Who decided how it was distributed? Old sharing norms were strained when resources could be hoarded. Sedentism intensified social friction. Living close together for extended periods amplified conflict. Waste accumulated, disease spread more easily. Informal social controls weakened as group size increased. Memory could no longer track everyone's behavior. Reputation lost precision. New mechanisms of regulation emerged to compensate. Rituals became more formalized. Rules hardened. Leadership roles extended beyond situational competence into permanence. Some individuals gained authority not because they were best at a task, but because they controlled access to resources or spiritual legitimacy. Hierarchies crystallized. Land, once shared and revisited, became bounded and defended. Fields required protection. Fences and markers appeared. Violence became more organized. For the first time, humans fought not just over immediate survival, but over territory defined by concept rather than use. The psychological shift was profound. Time, once measured by seasons and cycles, became future-oriented. Planning extended years ahead. Investments demanded patience. The present was sacrificed for a promised return. This mindset rewarded compliance and discipline, traits less emphasized in mobile societies. Work intensified. Farming required repetitive labor. Diets narrowed as reliance on a few crops replaced broad foraging. Nutritional deficiencies appeared in skeletal remains. Height decreased. Dental disease increased. Yet populations grew because agriculture supported more people per unit of land, even if individuals were less healthy. Numbers began to outweigh quality of life. Dense populations absorbed losses that would have devastated small bands. This demographic advantage propelled agricultural societies outward, often at the expense of neighboring hunter-gatherers who found themselves surrounded, displaced, or absorbed. Despite these pressures, The transition was not uniform or inevitable. Many groups resisted agriculture for millennia, adopting it selectively or rejecting it entirely when its costs outweighed benefits. Others oscillated between farming and foraging depending on conditions. The deep past shows flexibility rather than a single march toward civilization. What changed irreversibly was scale. Once human populations crossed certain thresholds, returning to fully mobile life became impractical. Knowledge systems shifted from landscape-based memory to abstract storage. Oral tradition expanded, then eventually gave way to symbols pressed into clay, ink on parchment, marks meant to outlast bodies and places alike. Writing did not create thought, it redirected it. Memory externalized freed mental capacity, but weakened direct connection to land. Knowledge could travel farther but lost local nuance. Authority centralized around those who controlled records. History, as we now understand it, began. Yet beneath written law and permanent settlement, older instincts persisted. Humans still responded to landscape emotionally. We still crave movement, variety, and direct engagement with our environment. We still learn best through doing. When modern life denies these impulses, unease follows. The long transition from mobile societies to settled ones was not a simple upgrade. It was a trade. Security increased for some, while autonomy decreased for many. Surplus enabled complexity, but complexity demanded control. The deep past reminds us that civilization was not humanity's first successful strategy. It was simply the most recent. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans thrived without fields or cities by remaining responsive, mobile, and embedded in living landscapes. That legacy did not vanish when we settled down. It remains encoded in our bodies and minds, a quiet reminder that the world we built is not the only way humans have ever lived, nor necessarily the one we were designed for. When humans finally began building permanent structures, the change did not arrive as a sudden revelation. It emerged quietly through repeated gatherings, shared rituals, and places that drew people back again and again. Long before villages formed, certain locations became anchors in human memory, sites where meaning accumulated layer by layer. These were not homes, they were destinations. One such place rose on a hilltop in what is now southeastern Anatolia. Massive stone pillars were carved and arranged in circles, each weighing many tons and decorated with animals rendered in low relief. There were no houses nearby, no evidence of farming, no permanent population. The people who built this place were still hunter-gatherers, and yet they organized labor on a scale previously thought impossible without agriculture. Quarrying and transporting these stones required coordination across dozens, perhaps hundreds of people. Tools had to be made. Food had to be gathered to support workers. Knowledge had to be preserved over decades because construction spanned generations. This was not improvisation, it was long-term commitment. The question is not how they did it, but why. The most compelling answer is belief. Something about this place mattered so deeply that people returned to it repeatedly, investing time and energy that could have been spent on survival. The carvings depict animals powerful and dangerous, predators rather than prey. These were not casual decorations, they were symbols drawn from a worldview where animals, humans, and forces beyond both interacted constantly. These structures did not house gods in the later sense. They created space for encounter. Gathering at such a site reinforced shared identity among dispersed groups. Rituals synchronized emotion and intention. stories were renewed, alliances were formed, knowledge was exchanged. The place itself became a participant in social life, shaping behavior and memory. This pattern likely existed elsewhere long before, using materials that did not survive. Wood rots, earth erodes, stone endures. What remains visible to us may represent only a fraction of what once stood. Sacred groves, earthworks, and temporary structures could have played similar roles for tens of thousands of years before stone architecture froze the idea into permanence. What makes these early monumental sites so disruptive to traditional narratives is their timing. They appear before agriculture, before permanent settlement, before surplus food. This suggests that collective meaning, not material necessity, drove humans to organize at scale. Rather than religion emerging from civilization, civilization may have coalesced around religion. As gatherings grew larger and more frequent, practical pressures followed. Feeding crowds required reliable food sources. Seasonal abundance was no longer sufficient. People began intensifying plant management nearby. What started as ritual centers may have become catalysts for farming, reversing the assumed order of human development. With larger gatherings came increased interaction between groups. Ideas spread faster, innovations accumulated, cultural differences sharpened, shared rituals unified participants temporarily, but competition simmered beneath the surface. Access to sacred spaces became power. Those who controlled ritual knowledge or claimed special relationships with the unseen gained influence. Authority shifted. Spiritual specialists transitioned from mediators to managers. Ritual calendars regulated labor and movement. Obligations became formalized. What had once been fluid participation hardened into expectation. Over time, inequality found fertile ground in these structures. Yet even as hierarchies formed, older values persisted. Many early monumental sites were deliberately buried, covered over after centuries of use. This was not abandonment through neglect, it was intentional closure. The act of burying preserved memory while preventing misuse. It suggests awareness of danger in permanence, an understanding that sacred power could become corrupting. This tension between gathering and control defines the threshold of civilization. Humans had learned to cooperate beyond kinship, to organize large groups around shared meaning. They had not yet resolved how to prevent that cooperation from turning into domination. The deep past offers no simple answer, only caution. Writing would eventually transform this dynamic. Symbols pressed into clay allowed orders to travel farther than voices. Authority detached from presence, laws replaced memory. History became linear, recorded, and selective. The vast unrecorded past faded into prehistory, dismissed as absence rather than fullness. But monumental sites remain as interruptions in that story. They prove that humans were capable of abstraction, coordination, and long-term planning long before kings or cities. They show that belief, not fear, was the original engine of large-scale organization. Standing before those ancient stones, it becomes clear that civilization did not begin with farming tools or walls. It began when humans gathered in numbers too large for personal memory alone, bound by shared narratives powerful enough to justify extraordinary effort. That moment reshaped everything that followed. The legacy of those early gatherings still echoes. Modern societies continue to organize around symbols, rituals, and shared stories. We build monuments, gather in crowds, invest belief into places and ideas that promise meaning beyond survival. The forms have changed, but the impulse remains the same. Long before written history, humans learned that coming together could create something larger than any individual. They also learned that such power carried risk. Civilization emerged not from ignorance of that risk, but from living with it, negotiating between cooperation and control, meaning and material need. The deep past shows us that these tensions are not modern problems. They are as old as humanity's first stones raised toward the sky. When writing finally appeared, it did not announce itself as a revolution. It crept in quietly, pressed into clay, scratched onto bone, painted onto walls. At first, these marks were not stories or laws. They were tallies, symbols for grain, animals, labor owed. Writing began not as art, but as accounting. And with that shift, something fundamental changed in how humans related to memory, power, and time. For hundreds of thousands of years, memory lived in people and places. Knowledge was embodied, rehearsed, through ritual, story, and movement across familiar land. Writing broke that bond. Information no longer required living carriers. It could outlast bodies. It could travel without its creator. This was a technological triumph, but it came with a cost that few recognized at the time. Once symbols could store knowledge, authority detached from experience. A person who could read marks held power over those who could not, even if they had never planted a field or hunted an animal themselves. Control shifted towards scribes, administrators, and those who managed records. Memory, once shared and negotiated, became centralized. Time itself was restructured. Oral cultures experienced time as cyclical, shaped by seasons and repetition. Writing encourages linearity. Events become ordered, dated, fixed, past, present, and future separate. History emerges as a concept, but it is selective, preserving what is written and discarding what is not. The immense span of human experience before writing collapses into a vague category labeled before, stripped of detail and significance. With written records came formal law. Rules no longer depended on consensus or immediate context. They became abstract, universal, enforced regardless of circumstance. This allowed large populations to coexist under shared systems, but it also reduced flexibility. Justice shifted from negotiation to compliance. Punishment replaced reconciliation. Economic relationships hardened as well. Written contracts enabled delayed exchange, debt, and interest. Obligations could persist beyond personal relationships, binding people to systems rather than communities. Debt became inheritable, inequality stabilized. A person's fate could be shaped by marks they never made. Religion transformed alongside writing. Oral traditions emphasize participation and renewal. Written doctrine freezes belief. Stories become scripture. Interpretation narrows. Authority consolidates around those who claim exclusive understanding of sacred texts. What had once been lived, spirituality risks becoming dogma. None of this happened instantly or uniformly. For millennia, oral and written systems coexisted. Many societies resisted writing, recognizing its power and danger. Others adopted it selectively. But over time, writing proved irresistible because it amplified control. States expanded, armies coordinated, taxes collected, bureaucracy grew. As civilizations rose, they told new origin stories. Humanity's past was reframed as a progression from ignorance to knowledge, from chaos to order. The long hunter-gatherer era was recast as a primitive prelude, valuable only as a contrast to civilization's achievements. This narrative justified hierarchy and domination by portraying them as necessary steps forward. yet cracks in this story persist. Archaeology continues to uncover evidence of sophistication long before writing. Art, astronomy, medicine, engineering, and social organization all predate text. Writing did not create intelligence, it reorganized it. Modern humans inherit both legacies. We benefit from external memory and global coordination. We also struggle with alienation from land, body, and community. Anxiety, disconnection, and dissatisfaction often emerge where systems override lived experience. These are not failures of individuals. They are symptoms of a mismatch between ancient psychology and recent structures. Understanding the deep past reframes this tension. Civilization is not humanity's destiny fulfilled. It is one strategy among many, powerful but costly. The written word enabled empires, but it also silenced countless voices that left no record. Entire cultures vanished not because they lacked complexity, but because complexity does not always carve itself into stone. Today we live surrounded by text, data, and digital memory. Information flows faster than ever, detached almost entirely from place and body. In this sense, we are living in an extreme extension of a process that began with the first marks pressed into clay. The question is not whether this trajectory is good or bad, but whether it is complete. The deep human past suggests otherwise. For most of our existence, meaning emerged from direct engagement with the world, from shared effort, from rhythms felt rather than recorded. Memory was alive, knowledge was local, relational, and adaptive. Those capacities still exist within us. Reconnecting with them does not require abandoning writing or technology. It requires remembering that they are tools, not replacements for lived experience. The danger arises when symbols are mistaken for reality itself. History, as written, is thin. It captures only the final moments of a much longer story. Beneath it lies a foundation of unrecorded lives, countless generations who thought deeply, loved fiercely, adapted brilliantly, and left few traces durable enough to survive time. They are not absent, they are simply unwritten. To understand humanity fully, we must look beyond what was recorded and listen for echoes in our instincts, our bodies, and our persistent longing for connection. The written word began a new chapter, but it did not erase what came before. That deeper story continues to shape us, quietly reminding us that being human was never solely about building systems. It was about living within a world that responded, remembered, and mattered. Seen from a distance, civilization often presents itself as an inevitable triumph, a natural ascent from darkness into light. Cities rise, technology accelerates, populations explode, and written history gives the illusion of steady progress. But when viewed against the full span of human existence, civilization is a recent experiment layered on top of far older instincts, and its successes are inseparable from deep vulnerabilities. As settlements expanded, humans entered environments of their own creation. Walls replaced horizons, fields replaced forests. Daily life narrowed from varied movement across landscapes to repetitive tasks tied to fixed locations. This shift demanded psychological adjustments no evolution had prepared us for. Minds shaped for mobility, novelty, and direct feedback were suddenly constrained by schedules, hierarchies, and delayed rewards. The earliest cities were dense and fragile. Archaeological layers reveal cycles of growth and collapse repeated across regions. Soil exhaustion, deforestation, salinization, drought, and disease followed in predictable patterns. Each collapse erased generations of accumulated knowledge, leaving ruins that later societies often misunderstood or mythologized. Civilization did not march forward, it lurched. Power concentrated rapidly. Surplus allowed some individuals to avoid subsistence labor, freeing time for administration, warfare, and ideology. Rulers justified control through divine mandate, ancestry, or cosmic order. Violence became organized, no longer personal, but institutional. Wars were fought not only over resources, but over symbols, borders, and belief systems abstracted from immediate survival. Despite this, humans adapted psychologically as they always had. New identities formed around occupation, class, and allegiance. Rituals reinforced belonging within large, anonymous populations. Architecture imposed order through scale, making individuals feel small in relation to the collective. These techniques stabilize societies, but often at the cost of autonomy and well-being. The dissonance between ancient instincts and civilized demands produced tension. Skeletal remains from early agricultural societies show signs of chronic stress, malnutrition, and disease absent in many earlier populations. Written records describe unrest, rebellion, and spiritual crisis. Philosophies emerged questioning power, wealth, and meaning. These were not new concerns, they were expressions of old instincts, struggling within new constraints. Even as civilizations expanded, many groups chose different paths. Nomadic and semi-nomadic societies persisted alongside cities for thousands of years. Some engaged in trade without settling, others retreated into marginal environments, deserts, mountains, forests, where centralized control was difficult. These choices were not failures to advance. They were strategic decisions informed by experience. Contact between settled and mobile societies shaped history profoundly. Empires depended on pastoralists for animals, goods, and military support, even as they sought to control or eliminate them. Cultural exchange flowed in both directions. Technologies, ideas, and genes moved across boundaries despite political hostility. The human story remained interconnected. Modern industrial civilization represents an acceleration rather than a departure. Fossil fuels amplified human power dramatically, allowing extraction and production at scales never before possible. Populations soared. Cities grew to sizes unimaginable in earlier eras. Distance collapsed under speed. Memory externalized further into machines. Yet the same vulnerabilities persist. Ecological strain now operates on a global scale. Climate shifts driven by human activity mirror the instabilities that collapsed earlier societies, but with far greater reach. Psychological stress increases as lives become more abstract, disconnected from land and community. Inequality intensifies. The ancient tension between cooperation and control reasserts itself in new forms. Understanding deep prehistory reframes these challenges. It reveals that many problems attributed to modernity are structural mismatches rather than moral failures. Humans are extraordinarily adaptable, but adaptation has limits. Systems that ignore embodied needs for movement, connection, and meaning generate resistance, whether conscious or unconscious. The deep past also offers perspective. Humanity survived ice ages, bottlenecks, migrations, and extinctions without cities or writing. Knowledge was preserved through relationships, not institutions. Resilience emerged from flexibility, not permanence. These lessons remain relevant in a world facing rapid change. This does not imply rejection of civilization or technology. It implies integration. The capacities that sustained humans for hundreds of thousands of years have not disappeared. They coexist with modern systems, often suppressed, but still active. When given space, they reassert themselves through art, community, ritual, and reconnection with nature. History often celebrates builders and conquerors. Prehistory reminds us of listeners, observers, and participants, humans who thrived not by dominating their environment, but by reading it carefully, who found meaning not in accumulation, but in belonging, who measured success by continuity rather than growth. Civilization is young, humanity is ancient. Confusing the two leads to distorted priorities. When progress is measured only by expansion, collapse becomes inevitable. When it is measured by balance, continuity becomes possible. The long human story does not end with cities or machines. It extends through them, carrying memory forward in bodies and minds shaped by deep time. Recognizing this continuity does not diminish civilization's achievements. It places them within context. The future, like the past, will be shaped by choices. Whether humans continue accelerating toward instability or rediscover older modes of balance depends not on intelligence alone, but on wisdom. The deep past offers no blueprint, but it offers something more valuable, evidence that alternative ways of living are not fantasies. They are our inheritance. Beneath concrete and code, the human animal remains what it has always been: curious, social, symbol-making, adaptable, vulnerable. The civilizations we build are expressions of those traits, not replacements for them. Remembering that truth may be the most important lesson the deep past still has to teach. Strip away language, cities, machines, and symbols, and something stubborn remains. The human body itself is a historical document, carrying evidence of lives lived long before memory was written down. Our bones, muscles, senses, and nervous systems were shaped almost entirely in a world without walls or clocks, a world where survival depended on movement, awareness, and cooperation. Civilization arrived too recently to rewrite that design. The human body expects variety. It evolved to walk long distances, climb, crouch, lift, and rest in irregular patterns. Modern sedentary life conflicts with this expectation, producing ailments that feel mysterious only because their cause is so ordinary. Back pain, anxiety, metabolic disorders, and chronic stress are not random failures. They are signals from a body optimized for a different rhythm. For most of human existence, stillness was rare and purposeful. Now it is constant and enforced. The senses tell a similar story. Vision evolved for scanning landscapes, tracking movement at a distance, and reading subtle changes in light. Hearing tuned itself to pick out footsteps, wind shifts, and distant animal calls. Smell guided food choice and social bonding. Touch regulated trust and reassurance. In artificial environments saturated with noise, screens, and chemical uniformity, these systems are overwhelmed or underused. The result is fatigue without exertion, stimulation without satisfaction. The brain, too, reveals its ancestry. It excels at pattern recognition, storytelling, and social navigation. It struggles with abstraction divorced from lived experience. This is why statistics often fail to move people, while stories do. Why faces matter more than numbers. Why moral outrage ignites faster than rational argument. These are not flaws. They are features shaped in small groups where personal knowledge guided survival. Emotion evolved as information. Fear sharpened attention. Joy reinforced connection. Grief preserved bonds beyond death. Anger defended boundaries. In early human societies, emotions were processed collectively, expressed openly, and resolved through interaction. In modern life, emotions are often suppressed, medicated, or isolated. The cost appears as depression, loneliness, and alienation, conditions rare in societies where social fabric remained intact. Sleep offers another clue. Humans did not evolve for uninterrupted 8-hour blocks. Fragmented sleep around firelight allowed vigilance and social interaction without exhaustion. Night was a shared experience, not a solitary one. Today, artificial lighting and rigid schedules disrupt these cycles, contributing to widespread sleep disorders that medicine treats as pathology rather than mismatch. Even cognition reflects deep time. Humans learn best through observation, imitation, and hands-on practice. Abstract instruction divorced from context struggles to take hold. This is why apprenticeship remains effective even in highly technical fields. It mirrors ancient learning pathways that shaped skill transmission for tens of thousands of years. Modern society often treats these tendencies as inefficiencies to be corrected. The deep past suggests otherwise. They are the foundation upon which human intelligence was built. Systems that ignore them must rely on constant enforcement and intervention to function. This understanding reframes progress. Advancement is not synonymous with replacement. New tools do not erase old needs. They coexist, sometimes uneasily. When technologies align with human nature, they empower. When they conflict, they demand adaptation at a psychological cost. The deep past also challenges assumptions about happiness and fulfillment. For most of human existence, meaning emerged from participation rather than achievement. Life was judged not by accumulation, but by connection, competence, and continuity. A person mattered because they contributed, because they were known, because their absence would be felt. Modern metrics rarely capture this. Productivity replaces purpose. Growth replaces balance. Success becomes abstract, often disconnected from lived satisfaction. The resulting emptiness drives constant consumption, distraction, and escalation, attempts to fill a void that systems themselves create. Yet the ancient blueprint has not vanished. It resurfaces wherever people gather around shared work, shared meals, shared stories. It appears in music, dance, sport, ritual, and art. It reasserts itself in moments of crisis, when cooperation overrides competition and hierarchy dissolves in favor of mutual aid. These are not anomalies, they are defaults re-emerging when constraints loosen. The persistence of these patterns suggests resilience rather than nostalgia. Humans carry multiple modes of being. Civilization emphasizes one. The deep past preserves others. The challenge is not to return to an earlier state, but to integrate what was learned across time. Archaeology often presents fragments, bones, tools, structures. But the most enduring artifact of prehistory is the human organism itself. Every instinct for fairness, every discomfort with confinement, every longing for nature, every joy found in shared rhythm traces back to lives lived without permanent walls. Recognizing this lineage invites humility. Modern humans are not the pinnacle of an upward march. We are participants in an ongoing experiment, benefiting from ancient knowledge while grappling with new consequences. The future will judge our choices just as we interpret those of the past. The deep human story does not instruct us to abandon complexity or innovation. It reminds us that sustainability, meaning, and resilience emerge from alignment between systems and nature, not from dominance over it. Our ancestors survived by listening closely to the world. That skill remains available. As environments change once again, driven now by human hands, the lessons of deep time gain urgency. Flexibility matters, cooperation matters, memory matters, so does restraint. The past shows that humans thrive not when they extract endlessly, but when they adapt thoughtfully. The final irony is this: the farther humanity travels into the future, the more it may need to remember where it came from, not to romanticize it, but to understand itself. Beneath layers of technology and abstraction, the same ancient creature persists, shaped by firelight, movement, and shared breath under open skies. That creature is not obsolete. It is still here, waiting for systems that recognize it, environments that support it, and stories that include it. Deep history does not belong to the past. It lives on in every human body, carrying forward a memory older than civilization itself. There is a quiet arrogance built into the way modern humans imagine time. We tend to see ourselves standing at the end of the story, looking backward at a long road that led inevitably to us. But deep history tells a different truth. For most of our existence, there was no sense of destination, no belief that humanity was heading anywhere in particular. Life unfolded forward, one generation at a time, shaped by conditions rather than destiny. Those countless generations did not think of themselves as living before anything. They lived fully in their present, solving immediate problems, building relationships and creating meaning that mattered intensely to them, even if it left little trace for us. Their success is measured not by monuments or empires, but by continuity. They survived, they adapted, they endured long enough for you to exist. This reframes what it means to be advanced. Complexity is not superiority. Permanence is not proof of wisdom. Many systems that appear impressive in the short term prove brittle over longer spans. Deep time rewards flexibility, not dominance. It favors those who can change when conditions change, who can let go of rigid structures when they no longer serve. Human history is filled with examples of societies that mistook growth for resilience. They expanded, extracted, centralized, and celebrated their own permanence, only to collapse when the systems they depended on exceeded ecological or social limits. From the perspective of deep time, these collapses are not anomalies, they are patterns. The hunter-gatherer world did not collapse in this way because it was not built to grow endlessly. Its limits were built in. Population size constrained resource use, mobility prevented overexploitation, social equality reduced internal fracture. These were not moral choices, they were functional ones. As modern humans face global challenges that echo ancient pressures, climate instability, resource depletion, social fragmentation, the relevance of deep history sharpens. Our situation is unprecedented in scale, but not in nature. Humans have faced environmental change before. They have survived by moving, sharing, innovating, and sometimes abandoning ways of life that no longer worked. What is new is speed. Changes that once unfolded over centuries now occur within decades. Systems optimized for stability struggle under rapid disruption, yet the same ancient capacities remain. Humans are still capable of cooperation across difference, still capable of learning quickly, still capable of redefining success. Deep history also challenges the idea that meaning must come from progress. For most humans who ever lived, meaning came from participation, from being embedded in a living network of people, animals, places, and stories. It came from doing necessary things well and being recognized by those who mattered. It did not require belief in a better future. It required presence. Modern societies often defer meaning, promising fulfillment later after growth, after success, after achievement. This deferral fuels dissatisfaction because the present becomes merely instrumental. Deep history offers an alternative orientation. Life matters now because now is all that is guaranteed. This does not mean rejecting planning or foresight. Early humans planned constantly. They stored food, tracked seasons, prepared for danger. But planning did not replace living. It served it. The future was considered so the present could function, not so it could be sacrificed indefinitely. Another lesson emerges from the sheer diversity of human solutions. There was never a single correct way to be human. Arctic hunters, desert foragers, coastal fishers, forest dwellers all developed different technologies, beliefs, and social structures suited to their environments. Uniformity was neither possible nor desirable. Diversity itself was a survival strategy. In contrast, modern systems often push toward homogenization. Standardization increases efficiency but reduces adaptability. When conditions shift, uniform systems fail together. Deep history suggests that resilience lies in variation, in allowing multiple ways of living to coexist and respond differently to stress. Perhaps the most humbling insight of all is this: Homo sapiens is not guaranteed a future. Many human species existed before us. All but one are gone. Intelligence did not save them, skill did not save them. What saved us so far was a combination of flexibility, cooperation, and circumstance. None of these are permanent traits, they must be practiced. The deep past does not offer comfort, it offers clarity. It shows that survival is conditional, that adaptation is continuous, that success can become liability if mistaken for destiny. It also shows that humans are remarkably capable of reimagining themselves when necessary. In that sense, prehistory is not over. It continues wherever humans face conditions they did not design and must respond creatively. The future may yet demand skills more familiar to our ancestors than to recent generations: improvisation, restraint, deep observation, and shared responsibility. Remembering deep history is not about nostalgia. It is about recalibration, about recognizing that the human story is far larger than civilization and far less linear than we are taught. It is about understanding that progress without balance leads to collapse, while balance without stagnation leads to continuity. As the modern world accelerates, the long silence of deep time grows louder, not as a warning shouted, but as a pattern repeated often enough to be unmistakable. Humanity has always lived on the edge of uncertainty. What changes is how honestly we face it. The ancestors who lived without names, dates, or records still speak through us, in instincts that resist confinement, in values that question excess, in the quiet sense that something essential is missing when life becomes too abstract. They remind us that being human was never about conquering time, it was about inhabiting it. The story does not end here, it never has. But whether the next chapters are brief or enduring will depend on whether modern humans can remember what allowed their species to survive when nothing about the future was assured. Deep history does not promise survival. It shows what has made survival possible before. The choice, as always, belongs to those still living. Imagine standing alone under a night sky unchanged for 300,000 years. The same constellations arc overhead, the same wind moves across the land, the same questions surface in the human mind, uninvited and unavoidable. Where did we come from? What does it mean to be here? And what, if anything, are we meant to leave behind? These questions did not originate with philosophy or religion. They are older than language itself. For most of human existence, no one believed the world was finished or complete. Reality was alive, responsive, and unfinished. Humans did not see themselves as separate observers standing outside nature. They understood themselves as participants woven into a larger fabric of forces they could influence but never fully control. This perspective fostered attentiveness rather than certainty, humility rather than dominance. Modern culture often seeks closure. Answers are prized over questions, solutions are expected to be permanent. But deep history tells us that permanence is an illusion. Everything humans have ever built, materially or socially, has been temporary when measured against time. What endures is not structure but process. The long human story is not defined by what was constructed but by how often it was reimagined. Tools changed, beliefs shifted, environments transformed. Humans responded again and again, not because they were guided by destiny, but because adaptation was unavoidable. Survival required responsiveness, not conviction. In this sense, the missing hundreds of thousands of years are not missing at all. They are present in every instinct to cooperate under pressure, in every discomfort with rigid hierarchy, in every longing for meaning that cannot be quantified. They surface when modern systems falter and people instinctively turn toward one another rather than upward for instruction. Crisis strips away abstraction. When faced with uncertainty, humans revert to ancient patterns. They share resources, they tell stories, they create symbols, they seek connection and explanation. These responses are not learned from textbooks. They emerge from deep memory embedded in the species. This is why moments of collective disruption often produce unexpected solidarity alongside fear. The same capacities that carried small bands through ice ages remain accessible. They have not been erased by technology or overwritten by civilization. They have simply been dormant, waiting for relevance. The future will not resemble the past, but the skills required to navigate it may. Flexibility, cooperation, restraint, and imagination will matter more than rigid planning. Systems designed for efficiency will be tested by instability. Societies that value growth over resilience will face hard limits. None of this is unprecedented. It is familiar, written repeatedly across deep time. What differs now is awareness. For the first time, humans can see the pattern. Archaeology, genetics, anthropology, and ecology converge on the same conclusion. Humanity's strength has never been dominance. It has been adaptability within limits. The illusion of control is new. The consequences of believing in it are already visible. The deep past also reframes legacy. Our ancestors did not seek immortality through monuments. They sought continuity through teaching, care, and participation. Their legacy is not carved in stone. It is carried in living bodies. You are that legacy. Every breath, every thought, every instinct reflects lives lived long before names or nations existed. This perspective does not diminish modern achievement. It contextualizes it. It reminds us that intelligence divorced from humility becomes dangerous, that innovation without restraint accelerates collapse, and that meaning cannot be outsourced to systems alone. If there is a lesson embedded in the vast stretch before history, it is this. Humans thrive when they remember they are part of something larger than themselves, but not in control of it. Balance is not static. It must be renegotiated continuously. Survival is not guaranteed, it is earned repeatedly through attention and care. As the modern world grows louder, faster, and more abstract, the quiet of deep time offers a counterweight, not an escape, but a grounding, a reminder that being human has always meant living with uncertainty, creating meaning where none is given, and choosing cooperation even when fear tempts isolation. The people who lived before civilization were not waiting for progress to begin. They were already human, already complete, already asking the same questions that echo today. Their lives mattered even without record. Their choices shaped the conditions that made everything else possible. The future will judge our era not by how advanced it appeared, but by whether it sustained continuity or accelerated fracture. Deep history shows that humans are capable of both. The difference lies not in intelligence but in orientation, toward extraction or participation, toward domination or balance, toward short-term gain or long-term endurance. Standing at the edge of this story, there is no final conclusion to offer, only recognition. The human journey did not begin with civilization, and it will not be defined by it alone. The deepest chapters were written without ink, and their influence has never faded. The question that remains is not what humans did before history began. It is whether we will remember enough of that knowledge to shape what comes next. Because long after monuments crumble and records decay, the measure of humanity will still be the same as it has always been: how well we learn to live within the world that made us.